30 years after the world lost the queen of Tejano music, 2025 has delivered a jaw-dropping revelation that has turned everything we thought we knew upside down. Newly unsealed evidence, long-buried files, and a chilling confession have reignited the investigation into Selena Quintanilla's tragic death. What was once believed to be a closed case now pulses with unanswered questions and haunting truths. Even veteran journalist Lester Holt couldn't ignore the impact, calling the developments deeply disturbing and completely unexpected. Fans who mourned her loss now find themselves questioning everything: was justice truly served, or has the real story remained hidden for decades? A powerful new Netflix documentary has reignited the firestorm surrounding Selena Quintanilla's death, exposing what those closest to her kept hidden for decades. Whispers once dismissed as rumors are now backed by interviews, never-before-seen footage, and emotional confessions. Could this finally be the moment the truth forces its way through the silence? What really happened that fateful morning at the Days Inn Motel in Corpus Christi? It began as an ordinary morning, but it would end in tragedy. Selena, just 23 and already a legend in the making, left her home full of purpose, but also concern. She was meeting Yolanda Saldivar, a woman who had once been her trusted friend, president of her fan club, and manager of her boutique stores. But recent revelations had shaken that trust. Allegations of financial mismanagement were swirling, and Selena wanted answers. What transpired in that motel room was sudden, shocking, and irreversible. The mystery of Selena's final hours, once thought to be simple, has now been cracked wide open. And what's coming to light is more devastating than anyone could have imagined. What happened next wouldn't just take Selena's life, it would fracture a community, devastate a family, and leave a permanent scar on Latin music history. On the morning of March 31, 1995, Selena arrived at the Days Inn Motel around 11 a.m., not to meet an enemy, but someone she had once trusted with her career and her heart. Yolanda Saldivar wasn't just a fan, she was the president of Selena's fan club, the manager of her boutique empire, and someone deeply embedded within the Quintanilla family's tight-knit circle. But trust had turned into suspicion. Over the weeks leading up to that day, Selena had uncovered unsettling financial irregularities. Funds were vanishing. Boutique records were inconsistent. Fan club money had gone unaccounted for. Receipts were missing, and explanations weren't adding up. Abraham Quintanilla, Selena's protective father and manager, had confronted Yolanda and urged his daughter to sever all ties immediately. But Selena, compassionate and conflict-averse, believed in resolution. She wanted to give Yolanda a chance to explain herself. What she didn't know was that this meeting would become her final act of forgiveness, and cost her everything. Nevertheless, Selena was adamant about seeing Yolanda once more. She thought Yolanda still had important documents, such as bank statements and tax records, according to people close to her. According to reports, the meeting didn't go well. The two reportedly got into a fight. Selena insisted on seeing the paperwork. Now stalled, besieged, and shifting blame was Yolanda. Yolanda then took a 38mm handgun out of her purse and fired it as Selena turned to leave room 158. A significant artery was severed when the bullet penetrated Selena's lower right shoulder. She screamed for assistance as she stumbled out of the room and fled across the motel parking lot toward the lobby, leaving a trail of blood in her wake. Selena gasped and fell at the front desk, according to witnesses. Yolanda, room 158. Before her body could react any further, she had been able to identify her killer. Paramedics arrived at the scene in a hurry. The injury was devastating, but she was taken to Memorial Medical Center. At 10:05 p.m., medics declared her dead despite valiant attempts. Her blood loss was too great. Nobody could have predicted how quickly word of her passing traveled. Programming was interrupted by local broadcasters. On air, radio hosts cried. And fans gathered in shock outside the hospital. A wife, a daughter, a cherished icon, a budding star, all gone in a flash. However, they were grieved by more than simply the fact that she was slain. It was the one who fired the shot. More than just a co-worker, Yolanda Salivar had been. The Quintanilla family had allowed her into their house, their lives, and their business. Even more bizarre was what transpired that day. Yolanda barricaded herself in her truck with the gun as police surrounded the motel, starting a standoff that lasted over 9 hours. She sobbed. She pleaded with negotiators, but in the end, she gave up. The case against her appeared solid from that point on. This is where things go hazy, though. Some claim that there were indications that something wasn't quite right despite the confession, the witnesses, and the well-defined timeline. Selena went alone, but why? Why, even after learning of the theft, did she still offer Yolanda chances? What transpired in that motel room prior to the gunshot? Numerous times, those last hours have been analyzed, re-examined, and recounted. However, in 2025, there may be more to the story, according to updates. Perhaps the solutions have been right in front of us. Or perhaps someone was always more knowledgeable than they admitted. In any case, the events in Room 158 had an impact beyond the music industry. It revealed a riddle that would not go away. Who was the Yolanda Salivar behind the fan club? You must comprehend Yolanda Salivar in order to comprehend the enigma behind Selena's death. Not only as the shooter, but also as the person who stealthily infiltrated every aspect of Selena's life. Many admirers have always wondered how she came so close in the first place, rather than just why she did it. Yolanda wasn't a pal from my youth. She wasn't an experienced business associate. She was actually a registered nurse in San Antonio before meeting Selena. She was said to be quiet and reclusive and had a tendency of changing occupations. However, everything changed in 1991. Yolanda became enamored after seeing a Selena concert. She regularly called Selena's father and asked to form a fan club. She was eventually granted permission by Abraham Quintanilla, who probably thought it would be a straightforward, small-scale operation. It didn't remain tiny. The fan club grew to thousands of members under Yolanda's leadership. She managed goods, memberships, and meet and greets. Yolanda was always close by as Selena's fame grew, planning events, interacting with fans, giving cards, and creating what seemed to be an unbreakable tie with the Quintanilla family. Her devotion seemed unwavering. So much so that Yolanda was asked to assist with financial management when Selena opened her stores. Yolanda fiercely guarded Selena from the outer world. She was constantly present, sometimes too present, to insiders. She was later described by former Selena, etc. Boutiques as domineering, challenging to collaborate with, and fixated on Selena's every action. According to some, she sought to restrict Selena's access to other people, interjected phone calls, and even inserted herself into conversations. However, Selena, who is renowned for her kindness and giving, kept her connections intact. She continued to assume the worst of Yolanda. There were red flags accumulating behind the scenes. Employees at the boutique started complaining. Goods were not being delivered to customers. Members of the fan club were griping about parcels going missing. The receipts did not match. Abraham also started a covert probe at the beginning of 1995. He was alarmed by what he discovered. Missing money, falsified records, and unreported sales totaling thousands of dollars. When he approached Yolanda, she denied everything and then gave conflicting answers. She allegedly stated that the lost records had been taken during a break-in in Mexico, but this assertion was never confirmed. Abraham forewarned Selena. He advised her to break up with him. Ever optimistic, Selena, however, continued to think that a peaceful solution was possible. She requested the return of the records. She wished to stay out of the spotlight. And perhaps she still thought it was possible to reason with Yolanda. It's more difficult to overlook another layer here, though. Theories that Yolanda's attachment went too far into obsession have surfaced throughout time. Pathological attachment symptoms have been proposed by certain psychologists. Her domineering conduct has been attributed by others to psychological manipulation. She was in charge of more than just a fan club. She was becoming more and more involved in Selena's life. Although there were early indications, none anticipated the outcome. Not even Selena. It was too late by the time the truth began to surface. From fan to friend to business associate to someone who could betray at the highest level, Yolanda had undergone a transformation. It's still unknown if her breakdown was brought on by dread of being discovered or if her spiral into violence was planned. What is certain, though, is that Yolanda had established herself as essential. And Selena held her close in spite of the warnings. After saying she would stop at nothing to help Selena, the woman performed the unimaginable. And we're still wondering why no one anticipated it decades later. Or perhaps they did and just took too long to act. The trial that brought the case to an end. Or did it? The courtroom was full. Outside, media personnel crowded in. In an effort to bring about justice, fans held posters and candles. Yolanda Salivar sat silently inside, confronted by a charge that didn't require an introduction. The evidence was overwhelming. National news has already covered the story. Everyone knew who had fired the shot that killed Selena Quintanilla. Was it the end of the story, though? The trial started in Houston in October 1995. Migrated there as a result of Corpus Christi's widespread media coverage. The time frame was established by the prosecutors. Under the guise of turning over missing company records, Yolanda enticed Selena to the inn for the day. The dispute got more heated. Then the shot was fired. The jury heard expert testimony, saw pictures of the crime scene, and learned how Selena was able to identify Yolanda before passing out. The fact that Yolanda fired the shot was acknowledged by the defense. They said it was an accident instead. Lawyers for Yolanda contended that she, not Selena, had planned to shoot herself. They said that as Selena attempted to leave, the gun went off. They described it as a panicky reaction, a horrible moment. However, the facts presented a different picture. It appears that Selena had already turned aside when the gun was fired because the bullet hit her in the back at an upward angle. It was difficult to dispute that detail. The jury found Yolanda Salivar guilty of first-degree murder after only 2 hours of deliberation. She was given a life sentence with the option of release after 30 years by the judge. It appeared to be final. Supporters believed that justice had been done. The family of Selena made an effort to move on. However, fractures started to appear in the years that followed. Some people think these cracks never received the attention they merited. First, there were concerns raised over how some evidence was handled. Yolanda said in 2019 that detectives never showed her defense lawyers a black baseball cap and a pair of white shoes. More than 20 years after the trial, these objects apparently made their first appearance in a Spanish-language TV feature. She claimed that her right to a fair defense was infringed by the withholding of such items. In a post-conviction petition, her legal team claimed that the suppression of evidence that was in favor of the defense may have violated the Brady Act. However, the claim was dismissed by the courts, who said the evidence would not have altered the trial's verdict. Nevertheless, it sparked curiosity. Why were objects that might have been connected to the crime scene never fully revealed? If they were unimportant, why did the media report them years later rather than during the court case? Then another problem arose, the personality of a crucial witness. According to reports, prosecutors were unaware at the time that Norma Martinez, the motel clerk who testified that Selena named Yolanda before passing out, had an outstanding warrant and a previous theft conviction. Her credibility might have been called into question by that particular detail. Once more, the court decided that it would not have changed the outcome. However, to some, it suggested that certain elements were overlooked in a case that appeared to be too quick and clean. Additionally, there is the more general worry that during the trial, important questions might have been obscured by the emotional toll of Selena's passing. Was the case handled hastily? Have all possibilities been considered? Or did the system close the book before it was finished because it was under pressure to provide justice quickly? The prosecution appeared to have won the trial on paper. Yolanda was found guilty. Resolution was seen by the public. It seems, however, that some pieces never quite fit when you look closely. Furthermore, some people are questioning whether the matter was really fully resolved in light of the facts that came to light in 2025. Whether Yolanda pulled the trigger is a settled question. That trigger raises the issue of whether it was a part of a more widespread, unsettling pattern that nobody wanted to acknowledge or, worse, that some people had long sensed but chose not to investigate. In any case, the mystery persisted even when the trial was over. An update on the investigation. Something unexpected arrived in 2025 after almost 30 years of stillness. There has been a subtle but noticeable change in the way that detectives and even former prosecutors now approach the murder of Selena Quintanilla. The matter was considered closed for years. After pulling the trigger, a fan-turned-betrayer was found guilty and imprisoned. The narrative is over. However, during Yolanda Salivar's parole hearing, new information has surfaced that raises the possibility that the case was more complicated or less impromptu than previously thought. The enigma surrounding Selena Quintanilla appears to have been resolved in 2025. Let's now discuss the latest findings from the probe. The contents of a number of sealed documents that were reportedly released earlier this year have sparked new discussions among the public. The community was rocked by one statement that was buried deep in the parole board's internal notes. "We had always suspected her." Neither the fans nor the family said it. According to reports, someone who worked on the initial investigation used it to allude to growing worries that Yolanda Salivar's actions had turned hazardous, manipulative, and unpredictable before to Selena's passing. However, if there were doubts, why weren't they addressed sooner? Sources familiar with the parole process claim that the 2025 probe uncovered testimony that had previously not been made public. Former employees of the store were discreetly reintegrated. Yolanda was accused by some of isolating Selena, censoring her communications, and even causing friction between Selena and her own employees. According to one, Yolanda secluded herself in an office and wouldn't give back the money until Selena arrived by herself. Although it's unclear if this particular incident occurred near March 31, it does indicate a troubling trend. Investigators also reviewed the 2019 allegation that Yolanda's protection never obtained all evidence. The now infamous white footwear and black baseball cap, gadgets accumulated from the resort, have been not listed in the original trial famous. Yolanda's lawyers argued that their absence robbed her of a full defense, claiming the objects would have supported her claims. But now, in 2025, there is an exclusive concept floating round. In step with forensic analysts who reviewed the recovered crime scene objects this 12 months, there is cause to believe Selena may additionally have been seeking to retrieve more than office work that day. Some consider she was retrieving something Yolanda turned into retaining as leverage, likely no longer just financial information, but something extra private. That component stays speculative, but it introduces a wholly new layer to the tale. If Selena knew she was strolling right into a risky situation, why did she pass by myself? That query keeps resurfacing. And the answer, in line with the ones acquainted with this year's assessment, may also lie in Selena's perception that Yolanda would not damage her. The parole board's file states that Selena was under the effect that resolving the issue in character might be more secure and more discreet. That influence alas cost her the whole thing. As for Yolanda, her parole request became denied. The board referred to her persistent refusal to take complete responsibility, her loss of remorse, and most significantly the traumatic mental profile that emerged at some stage in her incarceration. She is eligible for evaluate again in 2030, however primarily based on present-day statements, she is not likely to be launched whenever quickly. And yet, it's the phrase, "we suspected her all along," that has human beings speaking. Because if that suspicion existed in the machine, then why wasn't more completed? Why wasn't Selena warned with more pressure? Why wasn't Yolanda flagged earlier before she ought to isolate and manipulate her way to the middle of Selena's lifestyles? The new investigation would not answer the whole thing, but it does suggest that what took place in room 158 wasn't an isolated act of panic. It can have been the final move in a protracted, sluggish spiral of obsession and manage. One that left the arena mourning a celeb at the same time as the real reason stayed inside the shadows. Now, nearly 30 years later, that shadow is subsequently being pulled into the mild. The aftermath, circle of relatives, fans, and the Netflix revelation. When the parole board officially denied Yolanda Salivar's launch in March 2025, Fanatics Global set free a collective sigh of remedy. For Selena's circle of relatives, the news introduced a degree of peace, however now not closure. Because with that choice came a wave of recent attention, sudden revelations, and a renewed countrywide verbal exchange that no one was quite prepared for. On the center of this storm was a documentary that had been years within the making. Selena y los Demás, directed with the aid of Isabel Castro, made its debut at the Sundance Film Competition earlier this year. It wasn't a retelling of the tragedy. It changed into a re-exam of the existence behind the legend constructed from by no means before-seen home movies, own family interviews, and private moments that painted a greater intimate portrait of Selena. But what set this film aside wasn't simply the photos. It became the timing. It dropped proper as the parole hearings resurfaced lengthy buried doubts and lingering suspicions. Suddenly, Selena y los Demás have become more than a tribute. It became a piece of the research itself. Netflix quickly acquired the rights to circulate it, placing a wintry weather 2025 launch date. What visitors saw went far past song. The documentary blanketed candid interviews with Selena's sister Suzette and brother A.B. They spoke now not just about her career, however about the inner anxiety they felt in the one's very last months. Suzette found out that Selena were carrying plenty more pressure than human beings knew, and that the circle of relatives had grown worried approximately Yolanda's function, however struggled with how to handle it without detrimental Selena's photo or momentum. The film did not accuse all and sundry. It didn't need to. What made it effective turned into how evidently the pieces fell into place. Selena's smooth-spoken optimism, Yolanda's more and more erratic behavior, and the growing isolation surrounding their dating. Suzette admitted she still wonders in the event that they ought to have pushed harder to get Yolanda out of the image faster. All of us felt something became off, she said. However, Selena became a person who usually desired to give humans some other danger. The documentary additionally touched on a heartbreaking element that delivered every other layer to the tragedy. Selena had began speaking significantly about beginning a circle of relatives. According to her husband, Chris Perez, she had wanted to step far from touring temporarily and attention on having children. That dream, quietly discussed in personal, was in no way introduced publicly. But in Selena Dos, it got here to light and it devastated fanatics all once more. Social media lit up with emotional reactions. She had plans beyond track. One person wrote, she wasn't only a superstar. She turned into building a whole lifestyles. The timing of this revelation, aligned with the parole board's locating that Yolanda showed no regret, best deepened the effect. For many fans, this wasn't pretty much justice. It turned into about grieving the lifestyles that never got to completely unfold. In the meantime, public interest in the info of the murder spiked. Podcasts, YouTube documentaries, or even new Spanish-language speak indicates commenced dissecting the latest parole hearing files. They combed via phrases like, we suspected her all alongside and attempted to make experience of why that suspicion wasn't acted on more aggressively, become it denial. Became it loss of evidence? Or changed into it fear of unfavorable Selena's logo at the height of her rise? Whatever the motive, the revelations from 2025 have shifted the general public narrative. This isn't a tale human beings need to neglect. It is one they maybe now decided to apprehend. And in that pursuit, Selena's legacy keeps to evolve. Now not just as a singer, but as a symbol of misplaced capacity, misjudged except as true with, and a cultural icon whose final bankruptcy might also sooner or later be entering focus. Via all the ache, the enthusiasts continue to be fiercely unswerving. They mild candles, paint murals, and sing her songs. Because regardless of all the new info, one issue hasn't modified. Selena was loved. And that love has outlasted the silence. The legacy that refuses to die. Nearly 30 years have passed on account that Selena Quintanilla's voice turned into silenced, but by some means she feels more alive than ever. Her songs nonetheless echo via neighborhoods, clubs, and kitchen radios. Young enthusiasts, many born long after her dying, nonetheless memorize each lyric and put on her photograph on their t-shirts. In 2025, with a wave of new revelations and emotional retellings, her legacy has converted again. From pop culture icon to something a ways greater enduring, a reminder of how unfinished testimonies never actually depart. The recent parole board findings, the unsealed notes, and the resurfaced proof did not simply stir interest. They cracked open an old wound. The word, "we suspected her all alongside," hit in another way this time. It wasn't just about guilt or blame. It became about acknowledgement, a quiet confirmation that many humans, even within Selena's orbit, had visible caution signs. They simply didn't recognize a way to act on them. Or maybe the idea there has been nevertheless time. But that point ran out. Inside the months following the parole denial and Netflix's documentary declaration, a brand new generation of enthusiasts started out diving deep into the case, re-examining each detail with fresh eyes. TikTok threads, YouTube breakdowns, and podcast episodes explored the psychology of Yolanda's obsession, the not-noted proof, and the cultural strain surrounding Selena's stardom. For lots, it felt like the first time the full weight of her story had been advised, unfiltered and painfully real. Selena's circle of relatives has remained respectful but firm. They've expressed that while no new trial is at the desk, they welcome honest conversations that honor her truth. Selena Quintanilla said in a current interview, "We by no means ask for perfection. We ask for peace, however peace doesn't usually come quietly." That sentiment now resonates more than ever. The reality is, some mysteries by no means get tied up with a neat little bow. What passed off between Selena and Yolanda in that room will constantly depart space for questions. Changed into it a second of panic or something more calculated? Did Selena suspect the danger? Or did she virtually accept as true with Yolanda will be redeemed? The brand new statistic suggests it wasn't as spontaneous as soon as believed, however it nevertheless doesn't erase the heartbreak. Not anything ought to. What remains is a legacy that refuses to vanish. Selena was extra than a singer. She became a movement, a bridge between cultures, a symbol of hope, and a face of what might have been. And now in 2025, her story is finally being handled with the complexity it merits. Now not as a closed case, but as a living memory that also needs reflection. What do you suspect without a doubt befell that day? Let us understand within the comments.